Today assembled the Making of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier debuted on Disney Plus, and I thought I'd share some of my thoughts about it. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, Sean here, and one of the fun things that Marvel Studios and Disney Plus have been doing with their original content is creating this series Assembled that releases one after the series ends, doing kind of this behind-the-scenes look at the development of the show, the filming of the show, and how they did the special effects, some of their thought process going into all of it. So, back, 2 months ago when WandaVision ended, they put out an episode walking you through how they did all the behind-the-scenes stuff with all the sitcoms, the wigs, and all that fun stuff, and as Falcon and the Winter Soldier ended a week ago, that means this week we got the behind the scenes for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So if you're not going to watch the special, I'll try and tell you my big takeaways from it, or if you have seen it, you'll see what was most interesting to me, and we can have a nice conversation down below in the comment section. I guess with that said, if you have watched it, let me know what you thought down below in the comment section. In particular, what stood out to you about the production of the show. And this isn't a review, it's a behind the scenes on how they made a show. That feels like a weird thing to review in my mind, but it's still interesting to discuss what we kind of discovered. So I'll try and do this more as kind of what were my big takeaways from watching this show. With that said, I can hear my baby screaming downstairs, so I better go check on her. All right, crisis averted. She started playing with the Apple TV remote, which turned the Apple TV on, which switched my TV away from the PlayStation 4, where she was watching Abby Hatcher, or as she calls it, Bosley, over to the Apple TV, which was showing like a screener app. This was quite a traumatic experience for her, so I fixed it, and now she's back to watching Abby Hatcher, or Bosley. That's actually what she was screaming from downstairs. Bosley, Bosley, Bosley. Anyway, back to Assembled, the Making of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. First big gigantic takeaway I got from this one was just how troubled the production for this show was. They start talking about they're getting ready to start the show, and obviously we know that Corona factored into many issues as it affected everything from the year 2020. But we didn't even get to that. They start talking about how they had all these big gigantic plans to shoot in Puerto Rico, and there was a series of earthquakes that totally disrupted their plan for production. And there was one big earthquake, and they had we still want to go there. We scouted out. It looks great. They did all this research to see if they could film there, and they were like, yes, we can do this. And then they're a day away from leaving, and there's a second earthquake, and they just had to scrap their plans and redo what they were going to film, or their plan for the shooting location. And when you stop and think about globe-trotting show, the exotic locations are big part of what they're trying to do, that actually is a pretty big bit of adjustment. Then again, as we get into what went on with the production of this show, with the special effects and changing and everything, maybe it wasn't all that big of a deal after all. But so that happens, and then they start kind of getting into the 2020 pandemic shutdown side of things, and they started talking about how they'd only been in Prague for days, maybe a week or something like that, but like a fraction of the amount of time they're supposed to be in Prague to get all this stuff shot. I was kind of curious exactly how much didn't get shot, because February of last year, they ran the Super Bowl spot that was a 30-second spot, but it was promoting all of these Disney Plus shows, and they showed Sam throwing the shield into the tree. They showed Zemo dropping bullets, and I believe they showed the stadium shot, just a quick stadium shot of John Walker with a crowd of people clapping. So he'd shot in at least 3 different locations, 3 different sequences as of January. So I wasn't quite sure if it had actually been pretty close to being finished with it or not. Turns out, they had all the kind of middle section of the show in Prague. They barely touched on that. And then they had a scenario where, we all lived through last year, where it felt like things started escalate extremely quickly. And so they had one night where they just like, all right, we're flying everyone out of here at 5 a.m. And that's what they did. And you just have to wonder how much that kind of disrupts a show, how much that the morale and everything, when it's like you're in the groove of filming, you're in the groove of your workflow, and then whoosh, we're out of here for 6 months. I don't know, man. we all had a disruptive 2020, but it kind of really puts it into perspective of the nature of a show like this. You can think how much actors prepare for roles, whether fitness, whether a specific look, all these kind of continuity things that have to like line up. And it's like, we're on hold and we don't even know when we're going to come back to finish this. Remember, this show was supposed to come out August of last year. That was their plan. And then they didn't even start even shooting again until after that date. Just very much kind of disrupted, all of their plans for what was going on. So that's the big number one takeaway. It's just interesting of just how much this show kind of got turned upside down. And then even beyond that, this is alluded to, but not fully overtly stated in it. But you think about the fact that the show is very much about Sam as a black man in America carrying the shield, and what does that stand for, and what happens in that window of time where they're not shooting. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, social unrest, all related to blackness in America and the way people are treated differently, which is such a theme in this show. And you wonder, how much that factored in? Did they adjust the show in light of some of that? And Anthony Mackie touched on that. He's like, we set out to do the show 2 years ago. And it was all written 2019. And then halfway through filming, things pause, and the show becomes even more relevant than you could have possibly imagined. And in the special, he's bringing up all of these names, all these things we lived through last year. It's just kind of fascinating how some of that worked out, and wonder how much it factored in maybe some changes and things like that. One thing they didn't touch on was the supposedly there was a pandemic plot line, probably especially in episode 3, that they had to write around a rumor. That's the rumor. And there was early rumors that there's a pandemic plot line that they needed to change in light of actual pandemic, that not feeling like the best plot line. And as for my issues with the show in general, that fills in the gap quite a bit, if that's true. If the reality is that they had to go, let's pull this out of there, that makes a lot of sense to me. They didn't touch on any of that. And that feels pretty Disney. Disney doesn't seem to like to admit that sort of stuff. They keep that hidden. You think Solo, Star Wars movie, there's a whole second version of that shot by Lord and Miller. We haven't seen a frame of it. We've only seen the one that they released from On How. It's par for the course, so not terribly surprising. Second thing I wanted to talk about is their own interpretation of their show and how it would be received. And this is an interesting one for me. The particular plot point I'm referring to here is Sharon Carter. That we're a week removed. I haven't seen anyone that's been positive on that plot line. I know a lot of people that hated it, including my wife. She wasn't not nearly as invested in the show, wasn't paying nearly as much attention when I tried to get her to watch the episodes. She seemed to be surprised with the twist reveal that she was the power broker. I wasn't. You can watch my episode 3 review. I called it in there. Not that I was special. Many of you did too, because it was telegraphed. And in the special, the main guy for the show, Spellman, he's talking about, we want to do something different with the character. We thought, is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Are we revealing too much? Is it too obvious? And then, as we went through the show, it just felt natural, organic, played just right. And I think we thought it was a really great direction to take things. The language he used, I don't think I've seen anyone else use that language. That's exclusive to them in the writer's room. And I think one of the limitations of doing these specials the way they're doing them, it's cool to have them 1 week later to kind of see their perspective, the backstory, how did they create everything. I think the flip side to it is that it has no context. Which is to say, they filmed it before anyone in the public had watched a single episode. Edited it probably before anyone in the public had seen a single episode. In which case, they put out a documentary, or this special making of 1 week after everyone's like, oh, Sharon Carter, that didn't land very well for me. And then immediately the guy's like, man, it turned out great. What a surprise. What a twist, right? Crickets. It doesn't fully work. And that's where there's a certain benefit to when you do something like this with a bit of time, so you have reflection and they can kind of respond back to our criticisms. There's none of that here. Once again, Disney, they're not as known for allowing that type of honesty and reflection. where some other studios or some directors per se, just they let it all out there and they tell you what you're thinking. Like you watch the Zack Snyder documentaries before Snyder Cut came out, and he was like scorched earth on WB while they were letting him finish his movie. You don't see that with Disney. So it's just fascinating to me that the contrast between all the conversations I've seen, my own personal feelings, what my wife was like texting with her friends, like, I can't believe they did that to Sharon Carter. As someone not all that invested in the show, but someone that liked the character in the previous movies and being like, they ruined her. And then the creator of the show, totally different take on what people would feel about it. Third thing I wanted to talk about, this shouldn't have been a surprise, but just how much of this was CGI. It shouldn't be surprising because by now we've all heard about the fact that, in Endgame, all the white time travel suits, all that was CGI. They were all motion capture. Like, we know they go bananas with the CGI on these deals. But because this show had such kind of a grounded feel to it, where we're spending a lot of time at Sam's, sister's place on the boat at the barbecue. It felt so much more grounded. Even as they're doing the more fantastical elements, they're on a truck, a helicopter. There are things we can relate to, and there's just enough reality to it that it feels a lot more immersive. And then you watch the special features and you realize that was all digital magic, all like everything about it. And they're like, yeah, we shot this in Atlanta. And they show like these shots of them driving down this road in Atlanta. And my family's Texas. I went to college in South Carolina. And so the path is through Georgia. And so I spent a lot of time driving back and forth through Georgia. And so they show this shot of Georgia and these highways and roads and everything. It was like, yeah, I've probably driven that a few times. Felt so familiar. And then they just show them like changing out the background. And they're like, we tried to just add trees and that didn't work. And then we just fully replaced the background. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, all of that was digital. And then, all the fighting stuff, only a few of the shots were them on the top of a truck, which you can imagine that they're not going to put Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan on top of a semi-truck. We're not going to do that, of course. But so as you're watching it, you just see like all of it. They're in front of a green screen. Even when they did an actual live shot of stuntmen from a distance on top of actual trucks, the background was totally replaced. So every single shot in that fight scene on the trucks was digital. And I thought it was fully convincing. I think every single shot, there's no suspension of disbelief required. Like you can just buy into it because the special effects are that convincing, that good. And even just some of the movie magic of they filmed the sequence in almost entirely in Atlanta, and then they cut to a shot of Wyatt Russell, U.S. agent Captain America #2, falling off the back of the truck, and he's in Prague. And so they shoot this one shot in Prague that's an actual shot. And the seamlessness of the way movie magic works to make you convinced of everything, it's just really remarkable. And they kind of break that down, especially like in the opening flight sequence with the helicopters and stuff in the desert. And they're like, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. And so you don't know what effect they're using. And some of it is guys in raccoon suits jumping out of a plane. And then a lot of it is green screen, and they're using all the tricks and they're cutting between all of them. And so your brain just can buy into it. And that we're able to do that on a TV show is nuts. Like what they're able to pull off on a TV show. TV show with $150 million budget. It is essentially a movie in 6. Okay, sure. But it's released as a TV show. It's just mind-blowing how things have changed since I was a kid. And even what you could do with the biggest blockbuster in the world in the 90s and what we're doing for a TV show now is mind-blowing. And I think the ultimate example of that is the suit. They get to this section showing you in the suit, and they had a very specific idea of what they wanted to do with kind of the headpiece and what they would do. And there's not a fabric that can actually bend the way that the fabric he's wearing is doing without their creases and stuff like that. You're going to get that. And so they just go through all these shots of every time he did this, there'd be a crease and you'd see a big hole. CGI'd that out, and so it just looks like, this material that just sticks to his head. Even Falcon's cowl and costume, every single shot of him was CGI touched up to be superhero perfection. And they can do that on a TV show. That just blows my mind that we've reached that point in time where that's like, well, yeah, I mean, we've got the technology. Let's just go ahead and do it. And so they did. CGI'd every shot to relieve every crease, every bend, every little detail like that. So anyway, those are just kind of my quick thoughts on the behind the scenes stuff. There's a bunch of other things in there. They dive into each of the main characters, the side reveals, all kind of the themes about race in America, Sam picking up the shield. They kind of dive into everything that they're trying to explore with all of that. And a lot of the stuff I've talked about in my reviews about trying to use Isaiah Bradley as kind of this example of all of Sam's fears as a black man debating picking up the shield, and then he talks to someone that affirms all of his insecurities about it. Like they talk through all of that stuff in there, so it's a nice little companion to the show. As I mentioned before, I think it misses a little bit of context. I heard some other people talking about some comments about how they thought U.S. Agent or John Walker would be received, and like how they're gonna make people are gonna feel about him at the end of the show, and I don't think that's the way people really felt about him by the end of it. There's definitely some misses in their perspective on how the show would be received. It would be nice if they'd had the context to be able to respond to some of that a little bit better. But all in all, for the most part, a nice little way to kind of see what was going on behind the scenes, their thought process, the story of the production of the show, and then how did they pull off all this stuff. And as it turns out, with a lot of CGI and visual effects. Let me know what kind of stood out to you in it down below in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much.